get more reaction now. Governance analyst Professor Zwelinzima Ndevu joins us live via our video link from Cape Town to reflect on Mboweni's legacy. Professor Ndevu, good to have you on the program this afternoon. Firstly, Tito Mboweni began his career in the ANC during the liberation struggle, if you will. How do you believe his early experiences shaped his later roles in government and the Reserve Bank?
Good afternoon to you and good afternoon to your listeners. I think Tito Mboweni, at a very young age, showed a glimpse of being a brilliant young man, a young man that can be entrusted with the responsibilities to take the aspiration of the people of his country forward. And I think at that time, the liberation movement already identified him as one of those young generation that needed to be groomed for whenever the liberation movement becomes a government of the country. And he has never disappointed. His commitment in whatever task he is given has actually been some of the pillars or some of the things that were principles that he holds dearly. If he's given a task, either in the liberation movement at the time of exile, or when the liberation movement was unbanned, or when they were in government, he would execute those tasks with vim, with resilience, with commitment to his people and the broader society in South Africa. So those are the things that would really define who Tito Mboweni was.
And to take from a note made by President Ramaphosa earlier on, Mboweni was also pivotal in really adopting inflation targeting in this country. What challenges did he face, at least in your view, during his transition? And how did this approach differ from that of his predecessor, for instance, Chris Stolz?
Would remember that Mboweni was the eighth governor of the Reserve Bank, but the first one to be seen as a transformed or a black governor who many people, especially Labour, who has worked with him before when he was a Minister of Labour, had hoped that he would bring aspirations and views of Labour at the fore, especially with his history within the movement. So many people were actually surprised, and some disappointed and verbalized their disappointment in his targeted inflation. But he always had the bigger picture. So he could take the punch, he could take the fact that some people thought he has sold out, but he knew that in the bigger scheme of things, this would help our country go forward, this would help grow our economy, this would stabilize our currency.
So Mboweni was also known for his commitment to the independence of the central bank, the Reserve Bank, even in the face of political pressure. What does his leadership style reveal, especially about effective governance in challenging political climates?
One of his hobbies, I think it was really engaging in ideas. And he was not shy to raise his own views, his own opinion, his own thinking about where a particular topic should go or what his position is. And with the issue of the independence of the Reserve Bank, he was very vocal. He was one of those that would swim against the tide in indicating that this should be something that happens and this should something that is not tilted with politics or with other interests. And some people, it alienated him from some quarters of society, some people who believe that he was selling out, some people who believe that he did not understand the broader mass democratic movement. But in a bigger scheme of things, he was actually articulating policies of his own organization.
Speaking about that articulation, very interesting is that he introduced the monetary policy forums to really engage with the public. How important is this transparency, Prof, and public engagement in central banking? And what can other central banks learn from Mboweni's approach?
I think many of us have, for a very long time, been crying that an ordinary man on the street, except for getting the pronouncements from a governor of the Reserve Bank, they do not have a mechanism or a system where they can participate in these processes. And Tito Mboweni tried to ensure that ordinary citizens are represented in the views of the central bank by creating these forums. And what we can learn from that is that he has ensured that whatever decisions are taken at that level, whatever direction that institution is taking, it is a direction that is informed by views of everyone, including ordinary people. And this talked to his approach to life, which was simple, which was honest, which was about the greater good.
You've also mentioned Mboweni's reputation for honesty and integrity as well. In what ways do you think his legacy can indeed influence current and future leaders in South Africa?
I think all those who are in government who are left behind would have a responsibility to ensure that they emulate um, the principles and the character that Tito Mboweni demonstrated. I mean, it was unfashionable for a minister of finance to travel from Cape Town to Pretoria by road, but for constitutional or for economic reasons, Tito Mboweni would take that difficult trip between these two big cities or sittings of government. And that exemplified a public servant, a public leader who understands that he is entrusted with the responsibility to manage public purse and therefore must act responsible. And I think that is a challenge to the current leadership to emulate Tito Mboweni.
But also interesting, Prof, after his tenure in the central bank, Mboweni transitioned back into business and indeed politics as well. What skills do you think were essential for him in really navigating these different sectors quite successfully?
I think this was, many people actually criticized him for this, but whenever he gets an opportunity, he would explain that he wanted to ensure that, the views that he shared, the ideas that he had when he was in government, when he was in the central bank, are the views that are shared by business. And he has infused these views in the business society, business organizations that he has been involved in. So what that talks to, it talks to a person who is willing to move from a comfort zone to a zone that would not be comfortable, but to be impactful in that space as well. And I think many of us can learn from Tito Mboweni in that it does not help to only excel in your comfort zone, but moves to spaces where you are not ordinarily inclined to be in and excel in those spaces too.
Professor Ndevu, I'm not sure about your skills in the kitchen, but the former minister, Tito Mboweni's love really for cooking was well known if you really follow him on Twitter. And he often shared his culinary experiences on social media, on X. How do you think this personal aspect contributed to his public persona, if you will?
It really demonstrated the human side of Tito Mboweni. It really demonstrated that Tito Mboweni was not a person who lives an abstract world, although I'm not sure about his culinary skills, but the fact that he was willing to open up himself to criticism around this subject that many of us don't think he's an expert in was really exemplary, in a sense that he would cook food that is not desirable for a person who has lived at that level, or would not expect from a person who is being a minister, a Reserve Bank governor, and all of that. But he would remind us that all of us ordinarily are part of society, and what society does, we can also do.
Yeah. Back to more important matters. Mboweni also faced criticism, Prof, for his fiscal policies, especially during his time as finance minister. How can leaders indeed maintain resilience and conviction in their policies, especially even when they are quite unpopular?
I think that's one of the things that I probably think with hindsight you could have stayed and dealt with criticism, because ordinarily Tito, I think in his analysis, in his presentation of the policy fiscal framework going forward, it was looking at the economy that was not growing. And how do we ensure that we don't only grow the economy for the short term, but for the longer term? And many people did not understand his approach in that. And I think he did not do enough in convincing others of this particular position. And I think maybe it's something that he also might have felt that it's something that he should have done. Nevertheless, he decided when he cannot get others to buy into his idea, to give space for those that might have a better argument to convince others, which is a good trait as well.
As we begin winding down our conversation, Prof, but also in light of Mboweni's contributions, how do you assess the current economic landscape in South Africa? Are there lessons from his tenure that could still be applied today?
Certainly, I think moving with cautions, ensuring that while you provide services, while you develop policies that are flexible, that are richer in a sense that they attract foreign investments, but also balancing it with local trade policies is also a very important trait that we have learned from Tito Mboweni. Being cautious in moving, in utilizing resources, in implementing some of the decision is something that we can also learn. Don't being hasty. Consultation, as we indicated earlier on, it's something that also Tito did very well.
Let's get to your parting shot, Prof. What personal qualities of Mboweni do you think made him such a, call it a respected figure across this political spectrum that we speak of? Even among those who disagreed with him. I mean, we heard from leaders such as Julius Malema, who spoke quite fondly of Tito Mboweni, even though they sometimes did not agree on policy.
I think Tito Mboweni was able to engage with people that were in the other side of the benches, like he would engage with his comrades, was always eager to listen to their views, was eager to engage with their criticism of his approach to policy formulation, implementation of policy. But like a good dancer, he always knew when to get off the stage. And those qualities are very important qualities for public servants that many of us can learn from.
Like a good dancer, Tito Mboweni knew when to leave the stage. Prof. Ndevu, thank you so much for sharing your insights on Tito Mboweni's remarkable legacy. Of course, this comes as we continue keeping a close watch in Nkoankoa, in Zanin, this where the procession for the remains of the late former minister are being sent to their ancestral plot, where his remains will be laid at their final resting place.